I'm Murray Wax, an anthropologist at Washington University, St. Louis. And with me is Joan Cassell, also an anthropologist at Washington University, St. Louis. And we have the honor today of interviewing Zunia Henry, who is a distinguished person in her own right, and also was married to Jules Henry, one of the pioneers of psychological anthropology. Today is January 30th, 1988, and we are able to do this interviewing through the courtesy of the Wenner-Gren Foundation and the University of Florida. And I'd like to start out by asking Zunia a bit about her own background and how she came to be involved in anthropology herself.
Well, that's a rather funny story. After I married Jules, this was one day when I was at Columbia University in New York. I don't recall whether Margaret Mead was there or not. Ruth Benedict was there, Franz Boas, who was head of the Department of Anthropology, was there, and they asked me if I would like to accompany him and do some field work too. And I laughed, and I said, I'm not an anthropologist, I'm a musician. And I actually was having a fine time being a musician. I was a pianist, I was playing, I was teaching. Life was beautiful. And I had had no intention of going into any field and changing my profession. But it occurred to me all of a sudden when they asked me if I would like to do that. I told them that I knew nothing about anthropology, that I had never even read a book on anthropology. And all of a sudden, it occurred to me, as I thought, all my life, I was brought up in New York City, and all my life I had wondered whether somewhere in the world there wasn't a society that was better to their people than we were. And a question arose in my head, God, do you think this might be that society? And at that point I decided I would go. And so I told them I would. And thereupon I became an anthropologist.
Yes, and you went with Jules then to South America.
Yes, to the Piliga Indians.
Where are they located in South America?
They're located in the northern part of Argentina, in part of the Gran Chaco, which is a tremendous wilderness. I think it's 269 or something like that, 265,000 square miles of sheer wilderness, but real wilderness. And with a temperature no human being should be asked to live with, like 135 to 145 daily, and a bad area to live in general.
How did you get there?
Well, we left New York we left New York on a ship that took 32 days to get from New York to Buenos Aires. And that was wonderful. There was a Norwegian captain on board who was a wonderful dancer, who taught us to dance all kinds of dances, regardless of what the weather was like. And I'll never forget one time when there was a tremendous fog. Couldn't see a thing, but you could hear the sirens going. And all of a sudden, I looked to the side of the ship, and there was a shipwreck beside us. It was really a dangerous time, and we were dancing. Wonderful dances. Anyway, that was our trip.
To Buenos Aires?
To Buenos Aires, okay. Once we got to Buenos Aires, there was the usual South American, Latin American delay. All officials were away on vacation or heaven knows what. Anyway, we waited around for a number of weeks before we finally got reports that we could officially go into the field, which we did. We went first by boat on the River La Plata, and then on the Paraná, and finally we got into nowhere, and we took one of these single railroads. The area being what it is, by the time we got out of there the next day, we were all covered with a light film of gray. It was amazing. Not only were our faces and ears and so on covered, but our mouths, everything.
These were insects?
Mm-hmm. After we got out, oh yes, yes, insects. No end.
Was the gray insects?
No, no. Actually, we stayed at a hotel that night, Hotel Europa. The Hotel Europa had no water inside at all, no bathrooms of any kind inside. The walls were made of thick boards, 2x4s or whatever, with nice spaces in between so you could see and hear everybody in the next room. No floors, open windows, no screens of any kind. Anyway, it was only one night, so we stayed there.
And finally you came to the Piliga?
No, not yet.
I see.
After the railroad, we got a camion, a truck.
Yes.
And the Piliga lived this was in the middle of nowhere, of course. It was in the middle of the Chaco, which is wilderness anyway, with a clearing. And finally we got this truck and we got to the Piliga. I must say that when we got on board the first ship, an Argentinian anthropologist, mind you, came to say goodbye. He brought me some flowers and came to say goodbye. And I said, well, we'll see you in 2 years. He said, no, you won't. And I said, well, we have to come back this way. Jules has to be teaching at Columbia in 2 years, so he has to be there. He says, no, you won't see me. These are the most savage people in the Chaco. They will kill you on sight. Oh, fine. Okay, thank you, goodbye. And off we went.
And did they kill you on sight?
They were lovely to us. They had some wonderful qualities, mostly where they were different from us. Where their social organization, their economy and so on, was very much like ours, they were in trouble, as we are.
Did you learn to speak their language?
Yes, we had to, because the Piliga talked nothing else.
Was that a difficult process for you?
It's a very difficult, very complicated language. That's what I'm going to work on with Harriet Klein, who is a linguist. And actually, none of the Piliga could teach us their language. What we did was to borrow a man from a related tribe who talked a related language. And he could teach us Piliga. So we spent office hours all day, most of the time, writing out the language, writing out mythology. And what we did, of course, was to write it in phonetic script, in international phonetic script, with English translations under the Piliga. We each wrote a dictionary, Piliga, written in international phonetic script, with a translation into English. I still don't know what Jules' dictionary says.
How could you know international phonetic script if you were a musician?
Well, I had taken some languages in schools. I took Latin, Greek, and French. So for French, you need international phonetic script. And I remembered that.
Huh. You were lucky.
Yes.
I think of your work in the Piliga as being path-breaking. It was not as path-breaking research. There were not many anthropologists at that time who were studying children. And here you were, you and Jules, and you were studying children. And you were studying children from a psychoanalytic viewpoint. And I think of that as extraordinary.
Well, I don't know what your reasons are for thinking that's extraordinary, but, you know, one extrapolates from one thing to another, be it language or whatever. And since there were two of us, we could divide our time in different ways. And since I was not a trained anthropologist, I did something that nobody else did, naturally, you know? That's the human mind at work. Anyway, a psychoanalyst in New York, a child psychiatrist actually, David Levy, I don't know whether you know him.
He's famous for his studies of mothers and children.
That's right. He wrote Sibling Rivalry, a book called Sibling Rivalry, among others. And he asked us when he heard we were going into the primitive field, whether we would repeat his research. And so we said, sure. And so we took the book along. Well, Jules and I were rarely in the same place at the same time in the field. We each did our own thing. And with two of us, we felt that could be done. And I must say, Jules had faith in me. God knows why. Anyway, so there I was, and I tried his experiment. And it fell flat on its face. It was, the children just didn't react at all. They sat there as though nothing had happened.
What kind of experiment did you try?
Well, I'll tell you what David Levy's was. He was in the field, of course, to do therapy. And in New York, when people have the money, and the old child is in trouble when the young new one is born, they send the child to a psychiatrist to help him. Okay, so his experiment had a doll. He worked with dolls. A mother doll, a new baby doll, and the older sibling doll. And he would set up the experiment in such a way that it brought out hostility of the child, which was, of course, what he needed for therapy. Well, I wasn't doing therapy. I really was trying to find out what was going on in the lives of the children, how they thought, how they reacted, and so on. We had the daily observations. So I set up a totally different experiment. What I did was to set up families. And I'll tell you why I did what I did.
Families of the dolls.
From each child's own family.
Yes.
Yes. And what I did was to name the dolls for each member of the family, because by that time I felt safe in doing that. I had discovered by that time, from daily observations and living with the children and the families actually, that their whole idea of guilt was totally different from ours. When we feel guilty, it's destructive of ourselves. It destroys our self-esteem, it destroys our ego. Not so the Piliga. The Piliga know what's right and what's wrong, but it doesn't destroy them if they do the wrong thing. For example, the parents are not sacrosanct among the Piliga. It's a much more democratic situation. And what the children, if a little boy, I'm thinking of one little boy whose name was a 4-year-old, more or less. These people didn't count. So the ages are guesswork, as closely as we can. This child was angry at his mother. And so he went over to her and he hit her. And then he ran like hell, because he knew he'd get it back. So he knew he did something he shouldn't have done. And sure enough, we have a picture of him drenched. She threw water at him. So I was able to name the families as they actually were, and had the children repeat the names and point and pick up the dolls as they named each doll, a self-doll, siblings, whatever was in the family. I just set up the whole family, including the father. I always felt in psychoanalysis and in analysis at that time in general, and psychiatry in general, father didn't exist. It was always the mother. Whatever happened, it was the mother who did it, or didn't do it. I felt that was wrong. Even if the father was perfectly passive, that was doing something that he should have done something when he didn't.
And the children then responded and played with
The children responded. They came, we had to drive them away. They came in flocks and wanted to play with the dolls every day, which they did.
So clearly they found this game fascinating.
Yes, they loved it. Yes. And they did all kinds of very interesting things. We had a bunch of toys, you know, these toys that you wind up and they go off. I used to give them to the different children who were trying to intrude, you know, to get in on the play, to play with, to keep their attention from the dolls. It was very difficult to do. Of course, there were no doors among the Piliga, where everything is open. You live with everybody else. And I gave a little turtle to a little girl. And when her sister was playing with the dolls, for the experimental material, she shot this turtle to her sister and then turned to me and said, "Oh, way, the turtle bit my sister." I said, "Oh, there's the beginning of my experiment." I said, "Why? Why did the turtle bite your sister?" Didn't like it. That's why. There we are. Daily observation.
You know, that's interesting because this is what psychoanalysts took over afterwards and did in New York. This kind of, you know, in therapy with children. They did play therapy with dolls instead of, but they had whole families and named them.
They named them? I didn't know that.
I believe they did.
I'm very glad to know that.
I think they did. I could
But
be
we
wrong,
still live in a guilt-ridden society.
And the Piliga were not.
No, absolutely not.
Did you take photographs of
Yes.
your Jules?
Yes.
Wasn't
Oh,
that?
of us.
No, I meant taking photographs of the children.
Yes.
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 Wasn't that itself an extraordinarily difficult thing for you? Or
Not
should I say-
really, because we used to watch the children when they were playing. Mostly when they were playing games that they were making up at the time, you know. Spontaneous play rather than formal play. And the children were there all the time. Couldn't get them away. They were all over us all the time.
Yes.
So it was easy.
What kind of quarters did you have for living?
Well, we had brought a tent with us. And the Piliga built us a hut like theirs, which was much cooler. It was open. And it was
no doors.
no doors. They had they built a lean-to, which was very amusing. We never used it. But sometimes, what happened? The eldest daughter of the chief of our village, who didn't live too far away from us, about where that bookshelf is, anyway, one very early morning, which meant sunrise, when I got out of the tent, we slept in the tent most of the time. Well, when it wasn't too hot, which wasn't very often. Otherwise, we slept outdoors together with the Indians. But anyway, I got up one morning, and we had slept in the tent, and walked out of the tent, and there was the eldest daughter, Yalakachitin, who was the eldest daughter of our village chief, standing at our hut, holding the lean-to and pushing it against the open space where it was supposed to act like a door. And she took one of her earrings off, and was tying this door to a part of the house. And I looked at her and I said, "My God, she must have gone crazy. What are you doing, Yalakachitin?" And she says, "Well, Matagoy is around." Matagoy was a boy about 16, who was the only one of the Piliga that was known to steal things.
How was your work received at Columbia University?
Oh my God, they tried to keep me there.
How lovely.
When we came back, they said to me, "You're already a famous anthropologist, stay with us, you can have anything you want." I said, "No, I'm a musician."
Who were these people? Was that Ruth Benedict?
Ruth Benedict, Margaret Mead, Franz Boas.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes. Jules had worked probably with all of them.
Oh yes, he was working there. He was taking his degree there. He was taking his doctorate, working for his doctorate there.
Yes.
He had already written a Caingon grammar. He had spent 2 years living with the Piliga Indians in Brazil.
Do you want to tell us a bit about that research? Did you know much about that research?
Well, yes, but I don't feel adequate. I don't think I have adequate knowledge to really talk about it.
Were you married at the time that,
Oh, yeah.
That he went to the Caingon?
Oh, no.
No.
No. We were married when he came back from the Caingon. Yeah.
And so what did you do after you came back and turned them down?
I went back to music.
Ah.
Yeah.
And you stayed in New York City?
I stayed in New York City quite a long time, but then, in spite of myself, I found anthropology fascinating. Because I've never really gotten it out of my system.
And where did you go from there?
Well, I stayed in music a long time. I had studied at the Juilliard, and that was before the Juilliard called itself that. It was many, many years ago. I was very young at the time. And then I had a scholarship to go to Europe. And I studied with an absolutely incredibly wonderful man there, a wonderful pianist and teacher, who was really wonderful to me. He refused. I had a scholarship, and I wanted to pay him. And he wouldn't take it. I said, "But it's scholarship money. It isn't even my money. It was given to me to pay for lessons." He says, "I will take no money from you."
Who was this man?
This man, what was his name? Kreutzer. What was his first name? Leonid Kreutzer. He was a wonderful man, a wonderful pianist. And he taught me some very valuable things.
Where was this?
In Berlin.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You must have been good, first of all, to get the scholarship, and second of all, if he refused the money, it was because he thought you were very good. I'm sure he didn't do that with every student.
No, my God, he offered me everything they had.
When were you
My
married?
debut in Berlin, which was every pianist's dream.
Did you take it?
No, these were Hitler times.
What year was that?
31, I think it
31.
was. Yes. And I stayed there the year and a little longer. But it really got to be too bad. Not for me, but it was too ugly. It was too horrible. And obviously it was going to get worse.
Was Jules with you at that time?
No, I didn't know Jules at that time.
Right.
Where did you make your debut?
I didn't.
You never did. You got married?
I thought they were crazy.
Really?
I said, "I didn't know anything. What do you want me to play a debut for?"
And so you kept on studying
Yes,
and teaching.
yes. And playing, but not to do a debut.
Not a big fancy
That's right,
debut.
that's right.
Where did you concertize?
I played in New York, in Chicago, in St. Louis quite a lot.
Were you handled by an agency? Then how did you...
I didn't like organizations.
You're a natural anthropologist. Then how did you, who booked your concerts? All of that
People
stuff?
asked me to play. They set up things and told me about them afterwards.
Wow.
In Chicago, I understood that the first oboist, who was a beautiful oboist, wanted to play with me. And somebody I knew there set up a series of chamber music concerts, which I loved to play. And then Jules decided that I was going to Chicago half the week, spending half a week there and half at home. And he couldn't take it. He said he doesn't want to be alone that much. So I could understand that. So
But
I
you
canceled.
Yes, but now as I get it, you studied at Juilliard, you went to Berlin, you came back, and then you must have met Jules in New York, is that it?
Yes, yes. No, how did I meet you? I'll tell you how. When I came back from Berlin, and I was ready to get to work in music, I needed to. A friend of mine who had been a dancer and hurt her leg and couldn't dance anymore, was working in some office, which was a misery for her, called me and asked whether I would go on vacation with her. And I said, I just came back. I have a lot to do. I can't do it. Oh, she says, I have no one to go with. And I have 2 weeks, and if I don't take them, I lose vacation time. Well, I felt very badly about that. I said, okay, not very graciously. And so we began to look for a place to go. And we found in either The Nation or the New Republic or in some such magazine, a little place advertised, run by a Russian couple in Connecticut on Candlewood Lake. And I said, gee, that sounds good, let's go. So we went there. As we got there, we were approaching the inn, and there was a young man with a shock of black hair, a black-eyed Susan in his ear, a brown skin, you know, sunbeam skinned, and a pair of shorts, and that's it, playing ball with a little 5-year-old girl. I thought to myself, gee, that must be an unusual young man. Instead of going after the big girls, he's playing ball with a little one. I wonder what he's like. That evening for dinner, there were a bunch of young medical students there, and they didn't sound too smart to me. And that evening, Jules came up to visit us.
He saw you when you saw him.
Yeah. Anyway, we began to talk, and 10 weeks later, 6 weeks later, we were married. And after I met him, I said, I'll never go out with that one.
And he was already an anthropology student?
Yes, yes. He had just come back from the Kaigan.
From the Kaigan. Mm-hmm.
So there's the history.
Yes. But I noticed I think in the foreword to The Jungle People, he mentions your name. Did you?
Well, I helped him on it while he was writing it.
I see.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Although I assured him I didn't know anything about anthropology, he wouldn't listen to me.
What kind of help did you give him then?
The writing, and when I thought what he wrote didn't make sense.
Ah! Okay. Okay. Yes. Yes. And so that led you finally to go among the Piliga.
And after that, yes.
Yes. I'm a little curious just about the problems you had living among the Piliga. You know, I should think that for a married couple to live in that situation of no privacy would have been very hard, especially a rather young married couple.
That's right. Well, it had its problems, but we did sleep when it was possible in the tent, and we closed the fly of the tent, which was closed. So we were private usually at night.
Mm-hmm.
So that was all right.
And you managed with the insects, or you survived
Oh,
the insects?
the insects were incredible. We were very fortunate. The Indians didn't have malaria. Our fly zip cover, the screen on the tent, were covered with female Anopheles mosquitoes.
Mm.
Just a blanket of them on the cover. And we didn't get malaria because the Indians didn't have it.
Yes.
So we were very fortunate in many ways. But Jules did get sick eventually with a flagellar dysentery. The water was incredible, really incredible. You didn't need a microscope to see the living creatures in it. They were big, floating in yellow water. You shut your eyes and you drank. And Jules did get a black flat-foot dysentery. Why I didn't get it, I don't know. Just lucky.
And what did you do about it?
Well, what we did was, he was in bed for a long time, and finally he looked like Christ crucified. It was awful. And one day, while that was going on, it was no use writing to anybody. It would take a month for a letter to get there and a month to get back. And you had to kind of figure out things yourself. And one day a truck came up from the railroad station. And I thought to myself, we better go. And so I dressed Jules, and I dumped some clothes into a suitcase, and off we went on that truck when it left. And we went to a wonderful little town where Jules knew a bacteriologist, who of course wasn't there when we got there, naturally. He was in the Andes Mountains. But it was an absolutely gorgeously beautiful place. The owner of the hotel was kind of worried about the way we looked because we were wearing our field clothes. And so Jules explained to him that we had just come from the field and we didn't bring any city clothes with us. So he calmed down, it was all right. But anyway, finally the bacteriologist came back and gave him a preparation, which I gave him, but I didn't know what it was. I stupidly didn't ask him what it was. And later on, when I discovered, I did write to the Rockefeller Foundation in New York, the Tropical Disease Foundation, and they did tell me what it was. But by that time, I had tried my own cure, which was to give him less and less of it every day to see whether it would make a difference, and it did. So what I did was to slowly shorten the dose.
What was it?
It was, oh God, what is this thing that usually kills you?
Oh, you mean a toxic
Yes,
drug?
yes.
Mm-hmm.
Oh God, what is it? People use it to poison people with.
Arsenic?
Arsenic. It was an arsenic preparation, which has the same effect on a person as malaria. In other words, it gives you an intermittent fever. That's why I thought it was malaria.
Mm.
Did it cure the dysentery?
Yes.
But you thought it had given him malaria
That's
instead.
right. I thought we exchanged one disease for another.
Well, that must have been scary, being
It was
alone
scary.
there and not knowing anything and having these
That's
diseases
right.
to cope with.
Yes.
How did they prepare you at Columbia for all of this?
Me?
Both of you.
Well, I just took courses like crazy. I took every course that was offered in anthropology, Boaz, Benedict. I took one course with Margaret. Otto Kleinberg was kind enough to offer me his course. So I did a lot of that, and I went to many, many clinics, well baby clinics, maternity clinics, and because I really was an ignoramus, you know, I didn't know any of these things at all. And so I just boomed up on everything I could. So this was the preparation I gave myself.
Now, after you came back from the Piliga,
Yeah.
then I'm not sure that I know Jules and your history that well. I know that at some point you moved to Chicago. And
Yes.
worked at the
Yes.
with Bruno Bettelheim at the
place.
Sonia Schenkman Orthogenic School.
Yes. In the field, we became very much interested in psychiatric problems. That's when that part of it started. And when we came back, Bruno Bettelheim asked Jules whether he would study the orthogenic school, do an analysis of it for them. And Jules was very interested in that. And so he said yes. And the Ford Foundation supplied the money for that. And he spent 2 years. He was supposed to spend 1 year analyzing the school. And after that, Bruno asked him to spend another year there, which he did. He was also teaching at the university there, University of Chicago. And anyway, he became very much interested in studying the families that had produced a psychotic child. He was really trying to track down a certain kind of psychosis, so-called, I hate to use the word. I think it's so often misused. So for me, it's a bad word.
And so he went out to live with the families of these children?
What he did was to select certain children, certain families that had produced, each of whom had produced a psychotic child, and who had another family, other children living with them, and husband and wife were still together. And when he got a number of them, he would ask them permission if they would let him come and live with them for about a week, which he did. He thought this was the only way we will ever discover how psychological diseases happen, how they occur, how they develop, and what creates them.
This must have been very difficult for him to live with these families.
It was difficult, but he was so interested he was really interested in helping children, and parents actually. Because the parents who produce a psychotic child suffer the torments of the dead, of hell, really. And so that's what he did.
How did he manage to do these things? I mean, I'm walking, working, living in somebody's house and taking notes and things of that sort.
Well, when he actually lived and spent the night at the house overnight, he had his own room, or else shared the room with a young child. And he did that for about a week apiece, sometimes longer, a little bit less, sometimes a little bit shorter. And what he did was to very accurately, as much as possible, write down whatever he saw happening in the family. And he went shopping with the women, went to the grocers, to wherever they were going, took the children to nursery school, wherever they went, visit friends, go to parties, Sunday school, whatever the family did, he joined them in. Sort of like a benign uncle, you know.
And did he talk to you about these problems?
Oh, when he came back, there was a barrage of arguments back and forth. Jules and I were very much the same kind of people, in that we were both tremendously interested in humanity, in the causation, the etiology of not mental, for God's sakes, I don't like that word.
Disturbance, how's that?
Exactly, yes, thank you, yes. And he would see things one way and I would see them totally differently, which was very useful, because we'd argue the thing back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, day after day, day after day.
Could you give me an example of that after all these years?
Well, I can give you one.
All right.
There was one family where there was a 3-week-old baby. They had a psychotic child who was institutionalized, an older child, a little girl. Jules interpreted the mother's behavior toward the new baby, what to me was dead wrong and misleading, and might do terrible things to people who believed it, which would result in terrible behavior to the people who needed the help. And so I argued with him, and we really had battles over them. And I would get awfully angry, and I said, I'm not going to work with you any longer. I can't do it.
How did he interpret it?
It's really difficult for me to answer that question so that I give you a real picture of it. We each of us have our own problems that we're very much unaware of at times, very often unaware of. And that, I think, interferes with our thinking, because we were affected by the way we were affected as children. And I have yet to see a person who's really rid himself completely of that. Whether it's a person who is ignorant, whether it's a person who's been psychoanalyzed, whether it's a person who actually has been psychoanalyzed and acts and is a psychoanalyst and helps other people. It is something that it becomes part of us, as Jules said, like our lungs and hearts. And it's almost impossible to get rid of, no matter what insight we had.
I noticed, Zunia, that when I read some of the articles that then I saw in Pathways to Madness, the interpretations had changed.
How could you tell?
It seemed to
My
me,
God.
I wondered
I
if
didn't
this
know that.
was your influence. Originally, it seemed to me, the original versions were much more punitive toward the mother, as if she had done it to
That's
the
right.
child.
How
And
did
the
you know?
later ones,
How did you tell?
I could read it. And,
What insight?
and the later ones were much more understanding that the mother too was a human being, rather than, that awful idea of the schizophrenic mother, which was so much around in those days. She was the monster who
That's
ruined
right,
the child.
that's
And he
right.
started out with the monster interpretation and then became much more compassionate. So when you said this, I wondered if
That
that
was
was
it.
perhaps your...
That was it.
Okay.
Yes. Because my question was always, what is the etiology of this woman's behavior? Why does she behave that way? What was done to her?
Yes, and that's
Or to
why
the
the
father.
later versions I thought were so much better and more interesting.
Thank you. I was unaware of that. And I would say that was true about the fathers too. The fathers that are called passive fathers. Okay, what's behind that? I noticed, for example, that in one family, the Metz family, which later I worked on with a playwright and we put on stage in Boston, that in the home he was exceedingly passive, really passive, just didn't let the mother do everything. And she was the kind that would, if you let her, good or bad. And one day Jules went to call for a child who was going to be visiting home. And in the car, the young man, who was about 16 at the time, who was supposedly psychotic, allegedly psychotic.
Who you called Joseph in the book, wasn't it?
Hmm?
Joseph, was it the child's name in the book?
No. I don't remember what the book name is, and I don't want to mention the
No,
real
no.
No, we
names,
don't want to know that.
because I want to keep that anonymous.
So the young man in the car.
Sat next to the father. And during the ride, Jules was driving. Jules took them to the institution. And during the ride, the father put his arm around the boy. I thought to myself, there's a totally different picture of that father. He doesn't do that at home. Why? Why does he seem like a passive father, or why does he behave like that in the household? Well, okay, whatever the answer is, that father was not an unfeeling father toward his son, and I wanted to set that straight. There were so many angles the human behavior is so complex. You have to get so much in.
Can I turn to another phase of Jules' work?
Sure.
Jules,
If I can help in any way.
Yes. I was thinking of the work in Mexico
Yeah.
with Morris Swadesh.
Uh-huh. Oh, that was a very interesting time. That was the time when Cardenas was president of Mexico, and he, of course, was Indian, and he was interested in bringing the Indian tribes into the national life instead of having them isolated as they were living, with their own isolated languages even from one another. So that you couldn't really get a national picture out of that. I think if you want to do something nationwide, you have to have some way of getting a national language together, at least a common language, or some way of understanding one another. And what Cardenas did was to be so interested in bringing the Indian children, and he started with the children because he thought that was the best way to do it, and it was, I think. He built a school, a residential school in Mexico City. And he brought in children from whatever tribes he could. And the children were taught school there. They were given an education. And he also, Cardenas, also invited a group of linguists, among whom Jules was one, Morris Swadesh was another. There are a few others, I can't remember their names. I'm very bad on names.
Stanley Newman, perhaps?
No. I don't know. There's probably a reason behind
Right.
why I put it.
All right.
It's always a reason for everything, if we only knew it. But anyway, what these linguists did was as follows. They were to alphabetize the various Indian languages. And so this is what was happening in our house every day.
They were to develop a script, in short, so that the language could be written.
That's right. That's right. And what would happen in our house every day was every day they would share, the children would share meals with us. They would eat in our house, and the men on the project would try to alphabetize the language with the children. And actually, Jules built the first newspaper, put out the first newspaper in Tarahumara.
With your good ear, did you work on these language problems also, Zunia?
No, I was out of the picture then.
What were you doing at that time?
I was a musician.
In Mexico City or back in...
In Mexico City.
You were concertizing?
And I had a baby that time.
Well that...
Yeah, that took care of the time.
I should think so.
Yeah.
Yes.
Let's take a short break.
And then also you want to talk about the fact that this is an iambic pentameter.
Yes, too hot, okay, we'll let it cool,
Yeah.
then you can have it. Okay, well, it was nice to take a break, and you found the part that Jules snuck into Pathways to Madness in iambic pentameter without telling anyone.
Yes. This is the Keene family in which this occurs. And this is how he introduces it. Just before he writes it. On whom is the iron ring closing? And who's closing it? Who are the enemies, and are there enemies? Since it was Mrs. Keene who broke down, she became allegedly psychotic and died shortly afterwards, by the way. The ring closed on her, it seems. Yet if she had not become so ill, all we could say would be that existence had dealt with both of them so badly that they could only express obsessively the negative component of it, and that the iron ring was the circle of mutual attack. Since this is like an ancient tragedy in which actors express the pathos of the characters, I imagine two Greek choruses. Chorus 1, articulating mellowed experience and strong sympathy for the wife, and chorus 2, symbolizing inexperience and siding with the husband. In the following verses, they present two opposing views of the case. During the debate, Choruses sometimes become angry with each other, self-contradictory, and even insulting, showing how even, quote, sane, end quote, people can become vague and angry. As the argument wears on, they repeat themselves, and sometimes even seem to switch sides, another characteristics of, quote, normals, end quote, in heated arguments. First chorus. Since he's a man of little education, inclined to strike back hard at what annoys him, why should he be much different with his wife? You really think that he could see the harm when others, so much smarter, never have? If he's like me, brought up in city slums, and taught to teach her fellows with her claws, it ought to take him many years to learn that there are other ways to manage what you happen not to like in people close to you. Besides, the man has troubles of his own. Perhaps a dreadful infancy, a childhood even worse, and treated with contempt. He broods about this bickering, but there is nothing he can do. He knows, and so does she, that they are making life unbearable, not only for themselves, but for the children too. Does tenderness come naturally? Second chorus. I think it does. All men and women have an inborn need to get and give solicitude and tenderness, but it requires nurture in the home. But then, first chorus, but then if some are pushed aside and do not get that nurture, tenderness will be impossible for them. To give or to receive, they're beaten things, half rage, half fear, distrusting even, mostly, those close to them. Stretch out your hand and touch them once. They look at you, suspicion in their eyes. Second chorus. You mean they even might reject all signs of tenderness? That's horrible. You make them seem like porcupines or frightened cats with fur on end, with legs drawn up and arched back. But how explain the courtship? Married for some years, 2 children, and she's pregnant now. If there is nothing in their lives but hate and fear, first chorus, did I say nothing else? There still is hope in them, I think, that they will get some tenderness from someone who might, through a miracle, and that is what they want, revive, make real again the distant time when they received that modicum of care, of watchfulness, which throughout history has kept the race alive. You want me to continue?
There's so many other things we want to see. I think we should just say what pages it's on so that if anybody wants to go on, they can.
Okay. Okay, it begins on page 383 in the Keene family of the book Pathways to Madness.
I think that's all we need because the reader can then just go on from there.
Fine.
Now, what did other anthropologists think about this kind of
Let's leave it off.
anthropology?
Do you mind? What did they think of what?
Of
this?
something, yes.
Well, I don't think Jules ever thought of that. I don't think either of us ever did. And I think anthropologists simply ignored it. The people whom he really taught a great deal through his books and through his writings were Canadian, Europeans of one kind or another, and so on. So his books were translated in other languages. Russia was interested. I think they stole one of his books, I think Culture Against Man, without paying Random House anything. That's what they told us anyway. Whether it's true or not, who knows.
So you think he was a prophet with less honor in his own country?
Well, where he got honor in his own country was from students all over, whether he knew them or not. I think his classes, although he tried to discourage people from coming who were not serious, were always certainly in later life, no smaller than 250.
And he scheduled them at 8 a.m.
He scheduled the classes
to keep them out.
at 8 a.m. to keep them out, and he tried very much to discourage those that were not serious, that seemed not serious to him.
Well, that's a great place to get honor from young people.
Yes.
Russ says he remembers reading it as a graduate student.
Yes,
Culture
that's what he
Against Men.
told me. I had letters from all over, from students all over, telling me that their lives had changed because of that book, and thanking Jules for writing it, that they now understood what happened to them in their own childhood better, that they understood their behavior, the behavior of their parents better, and they got along so much better with their parents. And those, I think, were very good.
That's
Yeah.
extraordinary.
Yeah.
I'd like to see what you brought.
Okay. I just began to write what to remind myself.
Here, I can hold it.
Oh,
And we can take
pull it
it
up.
out
Okay.
together.
Oh, great. I got it.
All right. Well, I see this profile of Jules by Harold Gould.
Now, this is an article. Oh no, this is he was invited to talk at a conference, at an international conference in London in 1967, and he accepted. It was run by a group of psychoanalysts, actually, that were working in England at the time. Two of them were American, I believe. But anyway, he was interviewed, and interviewed by a man called Roger Barnard. He gave a talk on, I didn't bring that book. Anybody have a book called on
Sham?
vulnerability, sham, and
Yes.
so on?
Yes, we have
Oh,
it here.
good,
Is it over
okay,
there?
I can tell you what he talked on.
Yes.
Thank you. This conference was supposed to be on demystification, and they had all kinds of different people there, different fields and so on.
Neat title for a conference, neat subject.
Demystification.
Yeah.
Yes, that's what, here it is. This article is the 10th in the book. This was put out after Jules' death. I put together and put them out. It's called Social and Psychological Preparation for War. And he gives you the whole story of what happens. The economic and the psychological efforts made to make people willing to fight and kill. He begins the article, war is fought by social groups. Social groups exist in a mobilized and unmobilized condition. For the conduct of everyday affairs, social groups are integrated, tied together by processes which, ranging from the simple exchange of commodities and services of tribal peoples to the interlocking corporations, fiscal obligations, and controls and industry, government relations in modern states provided continuity and dependability. Mobilized such groups are prepared for extra effort, for an output greater than the requirements of everyday life. In
So
time,
now I'm going to stop you. The
Oh.
reason I'm going to stop you is that anyone can read this,
That's
but
true.
we can't find things from you that only you know.
okay.
And I want to hear about you and your life with Jules, and I want to hear the things that only you know and that you can tell us about. Now, you know, for one thing, I'm very interested in the fact that he didn't hold an academic job till very late. Why is that? Was it his choice? Was it because he was too much of a maverick?
Yes, it was mostly that. And he was rather abrasive about it, as many people are, of course. He felt attacked, and he was. But of course, when people are attacked like that, it could be because you attack other people. But his attacks were not personal attacks. They were disagreements on the way people thought. And to him, this was of utmost importance. And the person who sees more clearly than others, in other words, who's really more prophetic than others, is always in trouble.
He did have a very strong prophetic strain, didn't he?
Yes, yes.
What was it like living with Jeremiah?
It was wonderful. We had a wonderful life together. Shall I read one poem?
Yes, please.
There's another envelope in which I have them. I'm going to tell you these because I would like people to know what Jules was like, besides the academic Jules that they knew. I may have to ask you to read it.
Okay.
I don't have it.
All right, fine, I'll read it then. February 24th, 1960. Beloved, as the nut unto the palm, as the seed to the pomegranate, as the haft to the axe, and the string to the bow, so am I to thee, and thee to me, my beloved. As the steel plate welded to the ship, as the door to the room and the curtain to the window, as the shore to the stream, and as the light of day to the night, so art thou to me, and I to thee, O my beloved. I as the tear to the eye, the beat to the heart, and the breath to life, so art thou to me, and I to thee, O my beloved. What is night to thee is blackness to me. What is fear to thee is terror to me. What is silence to thee is emptiness to me. And what is longing to thee is loneliness to me, O my beloved. Though I laugh or converse seriously with those around me, laughter is a balloon, and conversation is mere forgetfulness. And suddenly, when there is a lull, I fall into anxiety. I think that I will go home and will be alone. Yea, as the image unto the stone on which it is carved, as the light unto the water on which it falls, as the wave unto the water in which it has its being, as the music unto the instrument from whence it is plucked or blown. Yea, verily, like the motion in the reed, so art thou to me, and I to thee, O my beloved. Place this beneath thy head, carry it in thy purse. May it pleasure thee when thou art gay, and comfort thee in fear, for I am with thee always. Now, what is this signed here?
We always called him Wooly.
Wooly. I didn't think Wooly. Is he still with you?
Is what?
Is he still with you always?
Yes.
Sounded that way to me.
Yes. You see, this is, I'm sorry, I couldn't read it. I'll give you one more.
Okay. May 16th, 1960. My hours with thee are like stars, O my beloved, and thy kisses are flowers. Who will say what love is that is not 70? Who will say what love is who has not been torn away from it? Who will say what treasure is who has not had it stolen from him in the midst of his enjoyment? Now, the last line is not here. Do you know it?
No.
There's one final line which I can't read. It's
This is
missing.
just a copy, nothing
Right,
more.
right. That somehow didn't.
Okay, I think that's enough to show that he was a very different person from what people knew. That answers your question.
Yes. Okay.
What was my life with the Jeremiah?
It's interesting because it has these poems, the two that I read, have biblical cadences to them.
Yes.
I mean,
He
they're
uses the language.
they sound
And
like
it's
the
also-
King James Bible.
Yes, that's right. Well, anyway.
So he was also a poet. It's interesting. Many anthropologists, more than one realizes, seem to be and have been poets. Sapir, Mead. Aren't they now? I think they're publishing now some journal with that, or a book or something of anthropologists' poetry. I wonder why do you think the sensibility that is drawn to anthropology is drawn to poetry?
I don't think I can answer the question offhand, but I do know that poetry has a tremendous pull for people. It's very exciting to write it. It answers a need.
Was this a need answered in you by music?
Well, music is my language. I talk that much more easily than anything else. But I also was drawn to poetry. I loved haiku, and it was fascinating. And once you start writing haiku, at least what happened to me was it was like an obsession. I couldn't stop. Just one after the other, just no stop. It was amazing.
Do you remember any?
You make me curious about Jules' early life, about the family into which he was born. Can you tell us anything
Well,
about that?
his mother died when he was 1 year old. And his father was a physician. He was in medicine. He had an older sister. There were just two of them. And the father was very cruel to the older sister. There was a little softness in him towards Jules. And he thought he loved him. What that meant, what is love, Something different to everyone. The meaning of it is hard to define, unless you define everybody's meaning.
But this love was hard to take, which is why he understood the love in the pathways to madness, perhaps?
No, I think the reason he understood, one of the reasons, was that they had a housekeeper, Annie McLaughlin, who was very good to him, who really loved him, and who brought him up until he was 14, I think. And so he learned a lot of the kind things in life. But it was hard for him too. He had a hard time at first. His whole conception of how to live was very different from what it became later on. His father was a very stingy man, terribly stingy. And Jules was so. When I first married him, he was terribly stingy. And I'm of course just the opposite. I'm careless, absolutely careless with money. And so when a friend needed money, one of my friends needed money, and I just gave it to them, he looked at me askance. He said, "They will never give it back to you." I said, "Uh-huh." So, couldn't understand what he was fussing about. But little by little he changed. He became very generous. So you see, there were some areas when we humans can change.
Maybe love can change us.
Yeah.
I'd like to know something about your friends over the years. You were friends with Francis Swadesh?
Yes, but we rarely saw each other. Of course we did in Mexico. But we left there in 1941, I think. And I didn't see Frances for a long, long time. And then she asked me to visit her. This was when there was this, I think it was an international conference, anthropological one in Chicago. When was that, 67? No. 76. Yeah. And then she and her new husband, after that, came and visited to St. Louis, and I think Jules was gone by that time. Yeah.
Who are the people you think of as having been close to you?
As having been close?
Yes.
Well, my best friend in St. Louis, we lived there from 47. Jules died in 69, and I left St. Louis in 86, May 86. My dearest friend was Dr. Rita Levi-Montalcini. Did you know her?
No, but the name is...
Yes. She's a biologist, among other things. And she worked at Washington U for some time. And she just got the Nobel Prize for biology. But she'd been getting prizes all over the world. And what she does with her money is to support families, poor Sicilian families. She's Italian. Poor Sicilian families. She sends their children to schools and meanwhile supports the family. She's a absolutely marvelous woman. A wonderful creature, really. She was my dearest friend. But she went back to Italy. She's head of a laboratory there. Yeah.
Who else?
The Sawyers. Rayfield Sawyer just died November 4th. He's an artist.
Oh yes, I know his work.
You do?
Sure.
I had a lot of his pictures. They disappeared.
There were brothers, Rayfield and Moses.
Moses died before that. You know how Moses died?
No.
Painting.
That's the way to go.
Isn't it? With a paintbrush in his hand. And he just went.
Oh boy.
Isn't that glorious?
Yes. And so the
That
Sawyers
was his
were
twin.
friends. I didn't realize they were twins.
Yes, they were twins.
And they're both painters.
Yes.
Identical?
Not the same kinds of paintings. Very...
No, identical twins?
That I don't know.
Huh. Different kinds of paintings. It's Rayfield's paintings. I know those sensuous ones of women.
Yes. I had some beautiful paintings of his. He did one of Jules and me.
Did he?
Mm-hmm. It's gone. I don't know. It disappeared when I moved.
What a pity.
Yes.
That's the trouble with moving. Things do get...
Yes. The Beckmans. Max Beckmann was a very famous painter too, internationally famous. They were very good friends.
Yes,
she was
there's a whole
violinist.
bunch of them at the art museum here in St. Louis.
paintings.
Yes.
Yes.
There's a whole room full of
Yes,
them. Those
yes.
are those big symbolic paintings.
That's right. I had a watercolor, his rare watercolor. That's gone. I don't know how they disappeared, who took them or whatever. But when I came to unpack, they were gone.
How sad. How upsetting.
Yes, I miss them because I've lived with them all my life. They were part of my life. And there were two portraits of Jules.
I'd like to know about, you were born in Russia,
Yes,
in Odessa.
in Odessa.
When? What year?
I don't know.
They didn't keep records.
They may have, but we came here and I never had a birth certificate in all my life. And my father said one thing and my mother said another. And since my father was the one who learned English first, he took care of the records. And my mother says he's absolutely wrong. And my aunt, my mother's sister, who knows everybody's birthday to the minute, as well as the day, said he's absolutely wrong. So what am I to do? So what I did was to take Jules' birthday.
How did they get out? Was there difficulty getting out? Were you raised on stories of pogroms?
Yes, yes. I had a very wealthy grandfather. My mother's family was very wealthy. My father's was very poor. They were farm people. And they were musicians, actually. My uncle actually played in the Tsar's orchestra. A Jew playing in the Tsar's orchestra. Can you imagine how good he must have been?
Yes.
And I remember when I was studying, when I was young, he would stand beside me at the piano and he'd keep time.
Were your parents musicians?
No, my mother's very musical. She sang. And I still remember the songs she sang in Russian.
Yes, so you know Russian too.
No, I don't.
But
No.
the songs you...
The songs I remember. I remember a few words here and there. That's it.
And I suppose your family was Jewish,
Yes.
but you are now Buddhist?
No.
No.
I just don't see where religion is doing us any good.
Mm-hmm.
It seems to me that it's preventing us from thinking of ways of doing good. It seems to me the thing to do is give us a chance to use our brains to think of ways of helping humanity instead of hurting. Not to hate one another. Hatred does not produce anything good. I don't believe in hate. I don't believe in killing. There are other ways of dealing with problems. Killing is not the way. It's not any way. It does not cure problems. It creates more.
Now, how did you become a musician? You know, what did your family do here?
No, I have it from, maybe that's genetic, I don't know, I hate to use the word.
Why not?
Well, I don't,
Musical
because
ability,
one
I think,
doesn't
can
really
be
know.
passed on.
Maybe. But my mother's family was musical.
Mm-hmm.
I had an aunt who used to play for the Moosey houses in New York. And I never heard anybody play as fast as she could. And my grandfather used to go with her to make sure that nobody paid her the wrong kind of attention.
Now, your family came here, and what happened to them when they came here?
My father and grandfather, my grandfather was a designer of clothes. And he was really a very wealthy man. He had a factory and so on. And so he decided that he and my father could become partners and have a business together. Didn't last very long. My father decided that he didn't want to stay with my grandfather. And so I think he bought him out. I really don't know. I was a baby at the time. So I really don't know exactly what happened. My grandfather was a very difficult man. So, boy, he was really the authority. I remember coming home once, he was home. I came home for lunch from elementary school, grade school. And he was talking in a way to my mother that I objected to. I wasn't very big or very old. And I objected to the way he was talking to her. And so I got up to my full height, which must have been about maybe 4 feet, maybe, not even. And I said, "I don't want you to talk to my mother like that." And he got up to his full height, which was really tall. Very handsome man with a shock of blonde hair, blue eyes. And he looked at me, looked me up and down, didn't take very long. And he said, "I will wring your neck like a chicken." I've never forgotten it. No one dare talk to him like that.
Now, where did you live?
In New York.
No, where?
Oh, in Manhattan. Actually, we lived across the street from Mount Sinai Hospital.
On Madison Avenue.
That's right. Right off Madison
That was
Avenue.
a very nice neighborhood. Your father must have done pretty well.
He
with
did
it.
very well. He became very wealthy. Wealthy enough to put a young man who was going to marry his sister's daughter through medical school. He did things like that.
And so you were given a good musical education. as
Oh,
well
yes, yes. Actually, my cousin, who was his sister's daughter, was a musician, so-called, and gave me lessons. And she was terrible. She used to slap my hands if I bought a piece of music that she hadn't prescribed for me. And she would take the music and tear it up, and throw it away. I got pretty sick of that after a while. Later on in life, I taught her. She asked me to teach her.
So you were a musician, then you met Jules, and then you were both really a musician and an anthropologist, since you learned to become an anthropologist like one learns to swim, by being thrown right into the water.
That's right, that's just what happened. But let me tell you too about Jules, that he studied singing at the Juilliard for 5 years.
Really?
He was going to be an opera singer, and he had a lovely tenor voice. Really lovely. And then, who's his professor at City College? Morris? Was that-
Morris R. Cohen,
Yes, yes,
a very distinguished philosopher of that
yes.
generation.
Well, he taught him he urged him to go into anthropology. That's how Jules landed in anthropology. That's how he went to Columbia.
Yes, Cohen had tremendous impact on a number of young men at
Yes.
that time.
Yes, he must have been a wonderful man. Yeah. Did you know him?
No,
No, I didn't either. Do you?
No?
No.
Tell me what you think of anthropology today. Did it fulfill the promise that you must have felt it had? I mean, after all, you did go into it.
I went into it because I was interested in the people.
Right.
People fascinate me. I mean, I want to know what they're like. I want to know why they're the way they are. I should say we, not they.
But when you're an anthropologist, you look into other people.
I think if you do that only, then you lose a great deal. I think you have to know something about yourself. For example, one of the things that happened to me in the field, which taught me more about myself than anybody ever had, was as follows. In our society, of course, we never say to anyone who is really a liar, "You're a liar. You're lying." You just don't say that. You're not that honest. The Piliga are tremendously honest people. I've never met anyone as honest as those Piliga. They don't lie, they don't steal, except this one young man that they were worried about. And there's no punishment. There's no police. They don't punish people. There's no competition. That's terrible. If a child competes, that's bad. All these things that we live by, which we think is what keeps humanity going, the Piliga don't practice at all. And in that respect, they're wonderful.
So something happened that influenced you in the field, you said. Was it to do with lying?
Well, this was the first real influence in my life, what I'm going to tell you now.
Yes.
I was packing. This is when Jules was sick with a flagellar dysentery. And I was throwing things into a suitcase quickly. And a bunch of Piliga girls and women were looking in at the open windows. And I asked them not to come in because I was pulling things from all over, and I knew I would be talking to them and whatever. And so I asked them to, I said, you can look all you like, but I need this space for myself right now. Because I'm in a hurry. We want to leave when the truck leaves, which didn't give very much time. And the women were saying, we're going to miss you, were saying to me. I'm Donatan. And I thought to myself, haha, they call each other liars if they want to, so I'll do the same thing. So I said, liars. And the moment that word got past my mouth, I thought, oh, you idiot. Of course they mean it, but they mean something different from what you mean. When we say we miss somebody, it's because we love that person, and we'll miss not having them around. Well, we used to give them yerba, sugar. You know what yerba is? Yerba mate?
It's a kind of tea, isn't it?
Yes, it's a kind of a wild tea, Paraguayan tea. And you drink it, you suck it up
Through
with
a straw or a
That's
reed
right.
or something?
Yes, that's right. And that's the first time I really had a good look at myself. And I said, you don't judge others by your own society. I said, hey, you're being an American. Not here.
We were just talking about that. In field work, you really learn a great deal about yourself,
Oh
don't
my
you?
God, you better. Yes, you have to. We're really so alike and so unique at the same time. We have to realize that there are some needs that are universal, that we all need, no matter how they're expressed. They may be expressed differently. But the need for caring by another person, that I think is universal.
Zunia, is there something that we should have asked you that we didn't, that you want to talk about?
Well, I'd like to talk about my aunt,
All right.
one of my father's sisters, who taught me to be a rebel.
Doesn't sound as if you needed much teaching.
No, I found into it very easily. It was very easy for me. But she used to take me when I was very small. She used to take me to street corner talkers, you know, these political
Soapbox orators.
who talked on street corners and had very interesting things to say. Well, I went along with her every time. And so I fell right into it. It was easy. It was just a natural for me. Yeah. And I think this is one of the things that changed Jules.
Really?
Yes.
In what way?
Well, I'll tell you a specific way. Don't know whether I should make this public. You can erase it if necessary. This was the first night we met at this little inn, this Russian inn in Connecticut. And Jules was telling me that he had just come back from the field trip from the Kangan, and he was telling me that he owed it all to Rockefeller. And I looked at him and I said, my God, what an idiot. I said, you don't owe this to Rockefeller. If it hadn't been for Rockefeller, you wouldn't have to owe it to him. Okay, that was the beginning of Jules' downfall, politically.
I'm curious, did Jules have any formal psychiatric training?
You mean, was he psychoanalyzed?
Well, was he
what you're asking me?
psychoanalyzed?
No, he was not psychoanalyzed. I tried to get him to be after a while. And he actually tried to make an appointment with someone that he cared about, that he thought a great deal of. The man didn't have any time, but he said as soon as he does, he will call him and make an appointment. Well, it never happened. But he studied. Jules' knowledge was unbelievable in so many fields.
You sound like no slouch yourself.
Yes.
Yep, sounds like you know an awful lot in a lot of fields.
Oh, no, I don't, actually. Let me read you a book review by a man who was head of family psychiatry in London. Book review of Pathways to Madness. I think I've left it in there. Or did I? No, it must have come off. Here it is. This is Dr. John Howells, who is an MD and psychiatrist. And he's director of the Institute of Family Psychiatry at Ipswich in the United Kingdom. And this is what he writes about Pathways. This is a review. This is a remarkable book. Remarkable because it is by Jules Henry, one of the creative thinkers of our time. Remarkable because it is the last book of a man whose stature will grow with time. Remarkable because of the methodology employed. Henry lived with the families as a compliant observer. Remarkable because an anthropologist writes on psychopathology. Remarkable because of its content. And lastly, remarkable because of the degree of compassion, tenderness, and humanity displayed by the writer. I won't read it because you can read it if you want to. I'll just read you the beginning of another review. This is in New York. No, this isn't it. Where is the other review? This occurred in Book Week. Which was published in the Herald Tribune in New York by a man named Melvin Tuman.
A distinguished sociologist.
Oh?
Yes.
Oh. Okay. Anyway, this is about culture against man. Once upon a rare while, a book appears that is so cogently conceived and so brilliantly executed as to command that any future work on the subject take this book seriously into account or be diminished by the failure to do so. Such is Professor Jules Henry's analysis of contemporary America.
Zunia Henry, I want to thank you
You're very
for participating. And just as you were reading these appreciations of Jules' work, I'm sure that there are people who, viewing this tape, will appreciate your candor and your talents. So thank you for participating, and thank you, Joan Cassell, for participating also.
It was a pleasure meeting you.
It was a pleasure meeting
and
you,
I
too.
think that everyone who looks at this tape is going to enjoy meeting you as much as we did.
Thank you.